thoughtful ideas and suggestions for guests and topics.
Great events, programs, and
Welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. To those joining us perhaps for the first time here for ACC's TV Dialogue Houston, we can be found over every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and again at 6 p.m. and Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, in the top of the hour, let me thank you for your thoughtful calls, emails, and text messages concerning previous shows we've aired here on ACC's TV Dialogue Houston, but particularly your great ideas for topics and guests and subjects to be covered on upcoming segments. For after all, this is your community affairs, public affairs show here on ACC TV. I have a great show planned for you today with a great friend of mine that allows us to look at these things, these issues we're facing as a community collectively, get to that shared common vision from a broader perspective that includes the kind of sociological, psychological, spirituality context kind of all rolled into one, because he's a practitioner of all of these things. He works in this area. His books have been kind of talking and focusing on this. It is all about community and how we as a people come together as that community. And that guest is none other than Marty Troyer, who is the pastor of Houston Mennonite Church here. And it is so great to have him here. And if you hear me kind of stepping over a couple of my words just then, it's just my excitement about having him. Because I thought about who could I bring on to really talk about this era that we're in, this moment in time, we call it this inflection point, whatever you want to call it. Because we need to figure out how to go forward. And going forward is interesting that we talk that way, because we're facing civil rights, liberties, structural racism, poverty, housing, education, racial and ethnic justice and identity, inclusion, acceptance, spirituality, even social and criminal justice, police reform, the list goes on and on and on. So how do we come to agreement? How do we become to look at the sweet spot between our aspirations and the realistic view of where we are today? And how do we move people together forward in some kind of shared purpose and shared vision? So that's what we're going to explore with our wonderful guest today. And I just have to say again, Marty, so glad to have you be here with us, and thank you for joining us today.
Larry, my friend, it's great to be here as well.
How do you see this? I mean, we come out of 2020, we got started in 2021, at least for the first 5 days, with great expectation of what 2021 was going to bring, and then January 6th happened. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And from my faith tradition, it happened on the Feast of the Epiphany, which to me, since God has a sense of humor, is no accident. I think there's something to be said to that, but that's for another discussion, probably another day. But how do you see the lay of the land at this point?
Yeah, Larry, I mean, nothing that happened on January 6th should have been a surprise to anybody. It wasn't a surprise. It was written in our history books. So 4 years of Trump has prepared us for what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. 400 years of Christianity in America has prepared us to understand what happened on that day. So we really are at an inflection point, but it's not a surprising place to be. It's just where we're at. And without a sense of truth-telling and understanding our history, we're going to repeat that. We're in store for more Capitol insurrections in the future. They're going to take different shape, but unless we take real stock of where we are right now and why we're here, we're going to be back here again.
Is the legacy of slavery catching up with us finally? And has the church had a complicit role in that by never really coming out strongly enough to condemn slavery, even using the Bible to make slavery okay? And part of what I see happening is that we're just reaping what we've sowed all these years, and it's finally catching up with us.
Those who live by the sword die by the sword. Yes. Yeah, MLK said that racism is the original sin of America. If you go back even further than that, as a pastor, I need to be able to say that America's original religion was slavery-producing Christianity.
Yes.
So 400 years of theology, of institutions, of ways of being in the church they've led to this moment. So are we finally getting what we deserve? It's been there all along. Racism and systemic white supremacy have always been part of our culture. It's always been part of the white Christian church. And yeah, it is coming home to roost, but it's been here. After slavery, it was Jim Crow. After Jim Crow, it was resistance to civil rights, on and on.
So in our changing demographics, changing demography of this country, Texas and Houston, it seems that white nationalism has now come forward because a lot of it has to do with this feeling of being replaced. And the numbers are there demographically. And I think the biggest mistake we made is one of our state demographers projected years ago that the state will be, by whatever the magic year was, will be a majority minority state.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I automatically heard from a friend of mine in Austin after that was said, he said, Larry, tell me what it means to be a minority, because I want to know before I get there. And since I'm going to be a minority in this state, tell me what that means. And he was very sincere. He was very sincere, which opened a great dialogue about systemic racism, institutional racism, all that stuff. But I think that's where a lot of people are. This scares people. I have a friend of mine who's moved now so far out I-10. He was living to move away from blacks and Hispanics. He's already almost halfway to San Antonio and Austin. He's so far west. But he realizes now, guess what? They're moving out here too.
Yeah, it's no accident that the Tea Party was birthed literally within weeks of President Obama's inauguration. Yes. And here we are again. You have Capitol siege happening within weeks of President Biden's inauguration. Those aren't accidents. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that there's been this white reaction of some white communities. There's been this reaction against multiculturalism and diversity. And your friend, it's interesting, but he's not a minority in the same way that he thinks he is.
And he's not a bad person, by the way. The man gives more money to charity than anybody I know, basically. He just has never been around. I'm probably his only black friend, and he has one Hispanic friend. And so his growing up in his era, that was just not something we did. They didn't reach out across the lines and et cetera. So I think part of this is, and we talked about this before, when it comes to church, parish, temple, synagogue, and mosque, I just said it's under worship, because that hour is still the most segregated hour in America. It is hard. It's not happening in the workplace. The schools are resegregated again. It's happening less in schools. Mm-hmm. Where do we go? How do we get to even interact with each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. The model for the last, 50 years has been, at least in the white church, the model has been, let's invite folks into our space. Let's invite them at the table. And that's where diversity is going to happen, and these relationships are magically going to flourish to change the world. That model, it didn't work, and it's not working. It's never going to work. We have to rethink that metaphor of the table. I've stopped inviting people to my table. What I've looked for is someone else's table that I can go and watch over the shoulder of them and see what's happening. But if relationship is really going to happen, if change is really going to happen, if the beloved community is ever going to come to Houston, it's going to happen by the white church not leading the way or being the conveners. It's going to be by us being followers and willing to go into other spaces and truly listen and learn.
Do you think enlightened self-interest will kick in a moment? Because in some churches, they're dying off every week, every month. There are more funerals than there are baptisms and weddings, etc. And it seems to me that for survival's sake, if nothing else, you're going to have to start outreaching to the communities around you, to all these new people living in the townhouses, all these young people of color, all these people around this church that no one's ever bothered nor wanted to have any engagement with.
Right. Yeah, so self-interest, I don't know. I don't have a lot of stake in that. And I'll just say as well, again, I'm a Christian pastor, but I'll say there are churches out there I have no problem if they die. I mean, there are churches that I would say their theology and their entire church history, it just needs to go, Larry. And so some of those churches, I don't think they're going to adapt the way that they should to survive. And I don't care. That's not a problem to me. But I do have a vested interest in the church. And I mean, here's one of the great ironies of this backlash against being a majority minority state. It's strange that the white church hasn't realized that when Hispanic immigrants come, when the Latino population grows in Houston, that is by and large a Christian population.
Yes, yes,
Even if if we would just be able to say to ourselves, well, we're going to be more concerned about the body of Christ, that's good church language,
right.
then we should be the first ones to open our arms up at the southern border of Texas and say, come on, you
Yeah.
are our brothers and sisters. You're one with us. And again, I call that irony, but I mean, yeah, that's a terrible reality, actually.
And those that do it, some do it and some try to do it, they still do it in a way that's very, to me, paternalistic, because I know there's a language question and a language barrier initially, at least initially. They have a separate service in Spanish.
Yeah.
And so you may have two bodies in the same space at different services who never cross each other's path,
Yeah.
never do anything between services to bring them together. And I find that so ironic, because that's kind of the growing trend, is to say that we have this Hispanic component of our church. We have even a separate wonderful mass in Spanish, but that doesn't help bring anybody together.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it inoculates the white parishioners from doing the real work.
Yeah,
I mean, if I can attend a church and say, hey, we have two congregations and one of them is Hispanic and they meet at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
right.
I mean, really, it sounds good, but it allows me to walk away and say my job is done here,
Yeah.
rather than spending the time. I mean, again, I'm a pastor at a white culture church. Rather than spending the time saying, how has racism shaped me?
Right.
How am I still part of these systems? What can I do to interrupt these racist white supremacists practices of the church and in Houston?
Yeah.
And until we're willing to ask those questions, that kind of false sense of diversity or that false pursuit of multiculturalism, it's not going to get us as far as we want it to go.
Do you think that is, well, I'm answering my own question, but I'm asking your opinion too. I think we can learn from South Africa in the race and reconciliation. I think it's time that maybe church leaders be the ones to get with the people in government to make this happen, because I think if they combine together, just like South Africa did, it will happen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we're going to get past this impasse, excuse the combination of those words, until we have truly that race and reconciliation conversation discussion and be honest about it and own up to some things and move on. Forgive, not forget, forgive and have reconciliation and move on. Yeah. But be honest about it. We have never wanted to have that conversation. It's a conversation actually we stay away from as much as we can. Right. That's why we never grow. We never change. We never move forward. And so I think it's time, and maybe somebody, Obama couldn't, everybody said, well, under Obama, you're going to probably try to make that happen. No, you couldn't do it under a black president. There's so many reasons why you couldn't do it.
Right.
But now, with Biden in the White House, and I'm putting some heavy weight on him. He's Catholic, I'm Catholic. His being Catholic lends itself to this in more ways than one. He is in Washington with the cardinal, black Catholic cardinal, the first black Catholic cardinal in the Catholic Church. He's there in Washington with him. If those two just got together and started some kind of conversation around this issue and brought in other denominations, other judicatory heads and leaders, I think that's all it would take. I might be naive, but I still believe that's all it would take.
Yeah, well, I fully support some kind of Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We are past that point. Like we should have started that a long time ago, but here we are. I am not overly hopeful that President Biden has started his administration in a way that's going to lead us in that direction.
Oh, I agree to that.
From early on after the election, his language was all about healing. His language was about unity, and there's a place for that. Those are words that we should be using. But he uses those like a bulldozer over top of accountability and prophetic civility. For me, I really like this phrase, prophetic civility. Civility, I think that's how our president has been acting. And quick definition of that, we can claim and care for our own identity and needs and allow everybody else to do the same. In other words, I'm not going to denigrate you. But there's a prophetic kind of civility that comes with the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, where, you can have civil dialogue, but I'm not going to be united with white supremacists. Right. The goal is not for me to get to the place where I can be comfortable in a room with people who have Christian nationalist religion or who are white supremacists.
Right.
That's not the language that's going to get us where we need to go. I was just going to say, like, truth and reconciliation, absolutely, as a vision, as a practice, it would be effective. I don't see that happening with our administration at this point, and I'm not quite sure who the religious leader would be, as far as the strong white religious leader in our country who could
Well,
help lead that.
that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
And the church, when I say church, all denominations have been so silent on all these issues. The George Floyd thing, yes, there were some who made little pronouncements, little statements, and more issue, but they were so weak and so mild, in my estimate. Might as well have not done them, quite frankly, including my church. And so, and now, and the December 6th thing, very few spoke out on that and said much about that, because that's government and civic.
Right.
Church and
Right.
state are separated. The same parishioner who's suffering is the same parishioner who's suffering as a constituent. There is
Right.
there's no difference. So the truth and reconciliation thing, I think, is important, though, in whatever form it may take here in the United States, because until you have that, the truth part is, I'm more concerned about the truth part. The reconciliation part is going to take time, but there's only one truth, right? You and I would say there's only one truth, right? God's truth, God, Yahweh, Buddha. And the truth does set you free. And until you're able to deal with the truth, accept the truth, there is no freedom.
Yeah.
For either side, black or white, green or pink, it's a burden on all of us.
Yeah. And I think, Larry, I think one of the gifts that the church could offer the world, and religion in general could be offering the world at this moment, is teaching us how to repent, teaching us how to admit that what we've done was wrong. I mean, it should be basic that we know more than anybody how to confess.
Wait, not only do you want me to forgive, you want me to repent. You want me to repent now. And wait, you're going too far now. See, I was willing to talk to you about
but
repenting that's it. It is about repenting. And what does that really mean in society to be a repentant soul?
Yeah.
And I think we don't know how to do that. Even in my tradition, we have confession. I've always said confession is not repenting. I can go to confession every week, every month.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I'm repenting for anything or trying to do anything differently. If I know I have this as my backdrop, in fact, it's almost the opposite. If I know I can go ahead and sin, I go to confession every other week and get forgiven and repent. So what?
Yeah, we're seeing that played out in Washington too. That exact theology. We see that from GOP leaders, especially those who we know are complicit in what happened in Capitol Hill.
Yeah, very complicit.
As well as ever since the election, these last couple months, there are folks who have used their voice for harm. I'm thinking of our very own Ted Cruz, my representative Dan Crenshaw, and they're the ones who are calling. It's time for healing. It's time for unity. And they're the perpetrators, they're the sinners, and they're telling the sinned against that they need to forgive.
Right.
There is a time for forgiveness, but it doesn't get pushed on the sinned against by the sinner. That's what American Christianity has tried to do. Yep. It's tried to be the ones who are, again, I mean, the white church has had the power, and so it's the powerful creating the theology, which then demands that the sinned against forgive the sinner. And that's the cycle that we're in. And again, I think we were seeing it played out right now in Washington and the religion of the conservative right.
I was going to go a different direction until you use that word. What is the religion of the conservative right? Please tell me. I don't know. I know some white Christians, but I don't know what the religion of the conservative right is.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great question, and I would love to. I'd love to read you in my entire book right now so that you could get my answer.
Wait, but I gave you a segue on purpose. So please first of all, give us the title of the book. I mean, come on.
Okay, so the title of the book is The Gospel Next Door, Following Jesus Right Where You Are. And in all fairness, there are multiple religions of the conservative right. But the real beating heart of the conservative right, Christianity, in this country is tied to nationalism. And it is tied to a restrictively personal faith. So all these conversations about systemic racism and problems at the political level, the conservative right religion doesn't have a container to hold those things. There's no vocabulary, no space to hold those because
Hmm.
faith is so individual. And because of that, you can instantly tie that to God and country.
Yes.
And so capital C's religion, which we saw on January 6th, again, not a surprise to anybody who watches this stuff. It's been brewing for a long time. But it is also, if you think about conservative right, it is tied to just a very select few issues. It's tied to the issue of abortion for one, anti-migration for another. A lot of these unexamined statements that they make, again, such as abortion, they're unexamined and they don't even hold water if you actually explore them and interrogate them.
Right.
So yeah, I mean that's maybe a nutshell version of conservative religion in America. As it's personal, it's tied to nationalism, and it's got a couple really small restrictive stances that they're just going to be willing to die on the hill for.
What I'm concerned about, as I've had dialogue with people since December 6th, I don't think it's fair to give a broad swipe to identifying nationalism, religious nationalism with white supremacy, because I think that's an easy cop out. There are elements of that. There are people who act that way, believe that way, but that's not the majority of white Christians that I know.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think there's a danger in any time we do that with any group to want to give that, well, let's just write them off. Let's just, they're not going to change. And I think that's kind of where we are, because I've heard some comments in the last few weeks. Well, we need to move on without them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can't move on without them. First of all, it's too large of a group to try to move on without them.
Uh-huh.
And so the work is willing to come to the middle. I want the conservative white evangelical on this side with the rabid liberal Democrat on this side to figure out by coming together what they do have in common. Because if we don't develop a middle, if we don't develop a middle base, we are doomed. Because I'll just put it this way, and our salvation is going to be found in that middle for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we bring people together for that dialogue to get to that middle? It used to be one thing we could always count on when we tried to develop the middle. What do you have in common? What's your shared value? Well, we all want a great education for our children.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't agree on anything else. That's the one we could agree on. Even that's in change as far as what that means.
Yeah.
In a resegregated environment.
Right. Right.
So where do we go? And you know what? We got to get a middle developed. We got to develop a middle.
Yeah, I mean, I might push back on that language of a middle a little bit, but I don't push back on the idea that we need a shared vision. And the language of the beloved community, for me, can be that shared vision. I mean, we should all be committed to human flourishing.
Right.
People of good faith and no faith at all should be able to say, what we want in the world is human flourishing and for everybody. And once we can agree on that, and I think religion gives us a really particular and powerful imagination around that idea of human flourishing. But once we can commit to that, that's a table I'm willing to join and have conversation about. But it's really important to note that too, there are a lot of families who are splitting based on politics these days.
Oh yes, big time.
And so that idea of either leaving some behind, there are families, there are people I know who they need to leave people behind because it's toxic and dangerous.
Yeah.
And so in specific cases, sometimes we need to leave people behind. But in general, you're right. There has to be a conversation about what the common good actually is and how religion has harmed the common good as well as can energize it. But I think that can draw us together. It should draw us together.
Well, the common good is that middle I was referring to. That word, I guess, is, and part of my use of the word middle is also the middle class. We have lost the middle class in our country. And when you had that shared values and shared purpose of the middle class, you had people from both sides who understood what that meant. And so I could start there. That doesn't exist anymore. And I think when we realize that the change we're seeking has to be social, economic, political, and spiritual, all four. And I always call it the four-legged stool. Give me a good sturdy four-legged stool that I can stand on. If we don't attack it, probably not the best word, if we don't approach it to include and be inclusive of all four of those elements, we're not gonna get anywhere. Because when I approach it on all four of those elements, I can find something that I can get you to agree on maybe the social part and the economic part, but not the political or religious. I got something to work with. I got wiggle room. I got leverage
Right.
to at least get you to come into the dialogue around one or two of those issues. And you know, for some people, it's easy to do all four just because we're developed that way.
Yeah, yeah.
But for most people, it's not. If I get two of the four, I'm doing good. But at least now I got something in common.
Yeah, I tell you what, Larry, you should get your own TV show because that's brilliant. I agree with that. I like the four-legged stool there. And again, coming from what oftentimes is siloed as the church, one of those four stools, yeah, I think our imagination as people and as religious folks needs to grow to encompass all four of those. And we run into so many roadblocks, denominational, socioeconomic, yeah, those four can be conversations that we do have. But what I'll say though, again, I'll kind of say what I said before. If we don't have a middle class anymore, then it's really important that we begin or really center the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. It's really important that we center the voices of the LGBTQ community. It's important that we center the voices that have been marginalized. Otherwise, we're just going to rehash the same kind of white privilege, white supremacist, systemic things that we have going on. And that old model is not going to answer your four-legged stool problem. It's just going to recreate it in its own image again.
Well, let me ask this in our closing minute and a half here, give you a quick chance to make anything, and also plug the book again, please. We talk about agency and having agency, and what does that really mean today? I don't really think we know what it means. I think we use the word and we use the concept, but I think that has to be explored. So give me your best closing thought for right now. We'll have to pick this up a little later. I want to get you in with a panel on. I want us to have a little panel discussion at some point and really probe into this in depth.
So agency, huh? Yeah, I think for Houstonians, our agency should be centered on truth telling and the skills that come with that. I think that we all do have the power and the capacity to tell truth to our family members, our congregations, our state representatives, and how empowering that is for us to be able to say to ourselves, I'm emotionally mature enough that I am going to tell you the truth. And in doing that, change can happen.
Right.
So you want to talk about agency. I mean, one of the things that's given me hope is the fact that thousands and tens of thousands of people flooded our streets last summer, and each person, that was an act of hope.
Yep, 60,000 here in Houston. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't have hope today if it wasn't for their hope, not just their action, but it's small things that we can do that are, again, rooted in truth telling, rooted in justice, and our faith should support that. It needs to be transformed into something that can support that.
All right, we have to pick that thought up so as we go forward later because we're out of time.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you.
I want to thank you. Just let me give a quick closing comment. Just hold on for a minute. So the challenge is turning outward. And what does that mean to turn outward? To really hope and develop together a shared purpose that can unite a community, to inspire community, to be a catalyst for positive change, to find that sweet spot between the aspirational goals and the realistic goals, and what's possible to keep people going forward, always moving forward. It's about our common humanity. It's about all those things we talked about. And it's what Buckminster Fuller has always said, the best way to predict the future is to design it, is to create it. And so to be a co-creator in designing the future that we want together is really the challenge. It's all about how we respond, how we recover, and how we renew. And based upon living in new knowledge, which is important in this process, to gain that new knowledge about things that is outside of my sphere of normal understanding, to be able to have that based on truth and not lies, have that based on fact, is so important going forward. Because as I said earlier, just a few seconds or minutes ago, the truth can save lives. The truth can set us free. And the truth and the light is really the only direction we should be headed, because it's the only direction that's going to save us as human beings collectively. I have to get out of here for now. So as always, continue to join us. We look forward to you being part of this dialogue for 2021. And until then, please stay safe, be well, peace, power, and love.